It's my pleasure to introduce the moderator for today's first panel, the Fireside Chat. Please welcome Stephanie Mehta. She is Chief Executive Officer and Chief Content Officer at Mansueto Ventures, publisher of Inc. and Fast Company. She previously served as editor-in-chief of Fast Company, where she oversaw digital, print, and live journalism. Under her leadership, Fast Company was a National Magazine Award finalist in design for 3 years in a row, and the title added 2 new annual conferences. She has worked as a writer and editor at Vanity Fair, Bloomberg Media, Fortune, and the Wall Street Journal. Please welcome the incisive and ever awesome reporter editor, Stephanie Mehta.
It's really an honor to be here today. I want to thank the opening speakers. They really set the stage for this exciting panel. And I'm going to go ahead and just bring up our additional speakers because I know we want to just dive right into the content. So please join me in welcoming, you've already met Liz Schuler, president of the AFL-CIO. We're also joined by Sarita Gupta, who is vice president, U.S. Programs Ford Foundation. And finally, he needs no introduction, Ben Whitehair, SAG-AFTRA Executive Vice President. Well, as I said, Liz, Fred, and Ben set up this conversation beautifully. And so we want to spend the next 40 minutes or so really digging into some of the issues affecting labor as technology proliferates and has the opportunity to not only help workers, but potentially harm workers. And how do we find positive outcomes for all American workers as this technology continues to grow and proliferate? And we've seen some of the fruits of that initiative in labor over at the convention center today. And I want to start with Liz because you represent more than 12.5 million of these workers. All of them have in some way been affected by technological change. What are the big trends you're seeing?
Sure, and thank you, Stephanie, for being with us and bringing your expertise into the room as well. And hello again, everyone. So yeah, in terms of the biggest trends and how tech is changing work, I would say there's sort of 3 that come to mind. The first is that workers are waking up to what's happening in terms of technology in their workplaces, and they're fed up with the dehumanizing and disruptive effects of technology. And I get to talk to a lot of workers. I'm traveling the country. I'm meeting and talking with workers in every industry throughout the economy often. And what I hear over and over again is the effects of things like algorithmic management, where workers are actually being fired by an app on their phone, right? Just-in-time scheduling, where people cannot plan their lives. Monitoring, surveillance, wearables, collecting biodata from workers on the job. And, where is that data going? Invasions of privacy. Certainly the disproportionate impacts of technology on people of color, women, immigrants, right? That we have seen happening, and yet people feel powerless to do anything about. I guess the good news is that people are finally seeing unions as a way to fight back, and that they're connecting the dots that unions can actually be a solution to coming together and balancing the scales of power. And we're in an environment where unions are actually more popular than they've ever been. And I think about 60 years, we haven't seen union approvals ratings so high. It's like upwards of 70% of people in this country support unions. So we're seeing organizing like never before, where people are coming together, especially in emerging industries like tech, where we see video game developers coming together, right? We never thought that was possible for people to form unions in that sector. The second trend I would say is, this wake up to the need for training and upskilling. everywhere you go. People are talking about, okay, either jobs are going away. What do we do? How do we help people map out and upskill to new jobs, or emerging jobs that people don't even know what they are at this point? And how are we going to plan for that training and upskilling for the future? And where can people go? And I said earlier, we've been evolving and changing and upskilling people for over 100 years in the labor movement. So we definitely see the labor movement as the path for that kind of preparation for training and upskilling. And the last trend I would say is we are in a moment of federal investment like we haven't seen in a very long time. And so there is a ton of potential. We have infrastructure investment, clean energy investment, chips and science investment, just a ton of potential to create good, high road, high wage union jobs. And we're at the table. We're helping to write the regulations, building out these regional tech hubs, and have standards and strings attached to all this money, the billions of dollars that are going into companies like, say, the semiconductor industry, where, if they're going to get that money, there's got to be strings attached. There's going to be good jobs and systems that are going to benefit workers.
I'm going to ask the same question of Ben, and I want to give people in the audience a little bit of context, because in addition to your work at SAG-AFTRA, Ben, you're also an entrepreneur and a technologist. So you are inherently drawn to this subject. What changes are you seeing? Let's start with the entertainment industry, but more broadly in terms of how workers are affected by technological change.
Yeah, I think in the entertainment industry, we've seen these changes and been both at the forefront and needing to deal with this for decades, right? The entertainment industry often is at the forefront of changing technology. And for any of you who have watched a television episode or movie, you have seen that in your screens. And again, that's an example of some really great benefits that are there. But I think the key that we've seen at SAG-AFTRA and with our union is that the technology itself does not tell a story. And we've had panels, of the technology perhaps this idea that technology could write the story itself, but we're certainly not seeing that yet. And I think the key is to be mindful of how those changes happen. And I think the trends certainly that we continue to see are the ease of access, which again, shadow side and light side. We have people of color and women in communities whose stories have historically not been told. That's not what you've been able to watch on camera and in your home. And increasingly, there are more opportunities for people to do that, and underrepresented communities especially. And at the same time, the technology can be used against those same communities. So I think it's finding the balance between those things. I think also we've seen trends certainly in our broadcast community and the changes of how news is being brought to people, MMJs, multimedia journalists, where, your people who are delivering the news are now being asked to write it, shoot it, edit it, changes in the music industry. So technology has been and will continue to hit every single aspect of our industry. I think that the key is that it is still people who are doing that. It is still, in my industry as an actor, it is still the storytellers and the creatives who are driving these things. And I think at our best, we can leverage technology to augment what it is that we're doing. But I also think it is absolutely the job of unions to make sure that we're putting in place guardrails and protections, because, left to their own devices, the big tech companies are not historically going to be mindful of the workers and of the people who it's impacting. So I think that's part of our job, is to find the ways that technology can benefit us. And I think there really is a win-win. I mean, as an entrepreneur, this may be shocking to you all who, have a job, but when you're treated with respect and you can put food on your table, you tend to be a better worker. And I know it's shocking. I know. Hot take here at CES 2023. And I think that is, I am seeing that movement even in the business community, where I think people increasingly are realizing what the labor movement has known for decades and centuries, that, hey, when you treat people well, when you treat people with respect, you're actually going to get better outputs. You're going to have better outcomes. We see companies challenged with, employee retention. Well, yeah, if you treat people like crap, they're not going to want to stay there. I know, hot takes here. But I think the labor movement has been aware of this for a long time. And I think that's part of what our job is to continue to spread that message, not just to our employers, but also to workers. As Liz mentioned, we see, the highest ever ratings of, approval of unions in society, but we still see a drop in private sector union membership. And I think we're at a crossroads. And, Liz and AFL-CIO and everybody here is, I think, at the forefront of saying, hey, everybody who's pro-union and you see the benefits and you're seeing what happens when you don't stand together against these massive corporations, hey, here's a vehicle to do that. Here's how you can actually do that, is that you can band together and then actually have some actual power to change the way that the companies do that. And I do think that there's a win-win there. And at the same time, we in labor know that we will fight the fight when that's not happening.
Sarita, your title at Ford Foundation doesn't really do justice to a career spent engaged in topics around workers' rights, economic and political issues affecting workers. And I'm really glad that Ben raised the issue of underserved communities. I'd love for you to talk a little bit about how your work at Ford Foundation sort of sits at the intersection of a couple of the foundation's mandates around equality, but also around workers' rights.
Sure, absolutely. So first of all, it's wonderful to be here, and it feels like such an amazing homecoming on many levels, because I am now in the world of philanthropy, but my heart is in the labor movement and always has been for many decades. So I'm really thrilled to be here and so grateful to Liz and to Fred and to Ben for inviting me to be a part of this conversation. So for those of you who don't know the Ford Foundation, just to say for a moment that over 8 decades, the Ford Foundation's mission has been to reduce poverty, to strengthen democratic values, and to disrupt inequality in all its forms. And one of the major approaches to how we do all three of those things, actually, is through our Future of Workers program. Too often, the discussions about the future of work has focused on automation, on robots, on new technologies. And what gets left out of the story actually is the impact of those new technologies on workers' wages, benefits, and working conditions. But these conversations also presume that technology is good for all. And therefore, working people should just adapt to new technological futures without question. But what's left out of that is that technology design is based on human design, as Ben was saying earlier, that for that reason, working people can and must be at the center in helping to shape and govern technology in the workplace now and into the future. So our Future of Workers program is really explicitly names. We're not the Future of Work program, we're the Future of Workers program. And because regardless of the status of workers, whether you're in the informal sector, the formal sector, your race, your ethnicity, gender, ability, class, everyone should have equal rights to labor protections. Social protections should be guaranteed to all, and that workers should actually be at the table shaping policies, systems, and technologies that impact their lives. But alongside our Future of Workers program, we also have another program, which is our Technology and Society program. And it's through this program that we don't take for granted that tech is good, but rather we ask the question, good for whom, right? Technology is good for whom? While technology has transformed how we learn, connect, and create, it's also exacerbated inequality. And from everything we've talked, Liz mentioned biased algorithms to, surveillance programs and much more. So for over a decade, the Ford Foundation has supported a pioneering new field of public interest technology that works with technologists, with researchers, with advocates, with organizers who have interdisciplinary backgrounds and ethical social science thinking to demand that technology be designed, deployed, and regulated in responsible and equitable ways with input from the communities most affected. And the common thread between these two programs at the Ford Foundation is a belief in a more expansive embodiment of democracy, where working people's voices are not only important at the ballot box, which it is, and elections, but is as important in shaping the wages and working conditions, as you all know, as unions, but how we leverage that collective voice and power to shape the technologies that impact them, especially at work.
So I've heard from all three panelists how important it is for workers to have a seat at the proverbial table. Liz, how do we achieve that? What are the things that you've seen be most effective in ensuring that labor, whether it's organized or not, is part of the decision-making process?
Yeah, and when you think about technology and how it's implemented, we've seen ways where it can go really, really bad and ways where it can go smoothly. And mostly that boils down to the worker engagement and involvement. So I think it's kind of an obvious statement, but this idea that the technology just is a whole lot better when workers know what's coming, when they can be upstream in the development of the technology, where they can have a voice in how it's implemented, and for a union, especially, to be a vehicle for socializing technology. I keep thinking about, and I think Randy Weingarten from AFT talked about this yesterday, the absence of humanity and this notion of relationships and how we engage with technology is so absent, in that show across the street, that really the labor movement, it can be at the center of how technology advances and how it's used, and how it's deployed. So I think, we have great examples of implementation where workers were at the forefront that we can talk about. But I think it's this notion of getting upstream, not being an afterthought, and really investing in things like training, where workers can actually be not afraid of what's coming, and have the capacity to know how to use it well. And that's when we see these experiments really go better.
Yeah, Sarita, I'll follow up with you. Whether it's through your work at the Ford Foundation or through the history of work that you've been doing with workers' rights, particularly when it comes to being versed in the language of technology, are there things that workers or their leaders can do to make sure that, they're talking the talk as well as walking the walk?
Yeah, when I transitioned to the Ford Foundation, my initial work was directing the Future of Workers program, and I remember going to a number of technology-oriented conferences and meetings, and it was a whole different language to learn and understand, and not just the technical terms, but what was being meant and suggested, and the undergirding sort of values that were being lifted up or being squashed, if you will. And it took me a while to learn how to translate, interpret all of that. And so I guess what I would say is it is so critical for the labor movement, the workers' rights movement, to get up to speed on technology and technological impacts. I was just telling Liz, I'm in too many spaces right now where I'm like, where there is nobody from labor in the space. And we have to get beyond that now. And the reason is really, really important. It's both because we know, as Liz said, like when workers are actually designing it, we make for better outcomes, right, for all. But also because we know that inequalities or inequities that play out in the analog world, and Ben said this earlier, but if we think about inequities such as discrimination on the basis of geography or race, social class and ability, they're replicated and frankly accelerated in the digital world. And so as a movement that is committed to equity, we need to actually be at the forefront of designing for a different future. When we look at platform-mediated work right now, such as rideshare and delivery services, they're all falling short of their promises of freedom and flexibility. Instead, they're becoming engines of precarity. So this form of gig work has led to, as we know, become increasingly informal, much more on demand. And workers, as a result, are facing heightened insecurities and fragmentation and disenfranchisement. So, for me, when I think about technology, technology is in so many ways a core feature within the present and future of labor. And therefore, labor movements have to be at the forefront of this. And so I'm really heartened by this summit and the work of the AFL-CIO Tech Institute and others in really getting up to speed on the impacts and figuring out which conversations does the labor movement need to be a part of to really, to Liz's point, get on the front end of the conversations beyond being an afterthought. And I'll just say that philanthropy can actually be an ally and a partner in this. And for Ford, for years being in this space, we're supporting a tech table right now where workers engage with not only tech policy experts and technologists together to kind of think about what are the problems we're solving for? What are the challenges and how can we build something better? I have to tell you, we seeded one of the first grants to a tech policy think tank to include workers. Because most tech policy think tanks were they were thinking about consumers and they were thinking about what the company needed, but they were not thinking about what workers need. We have to look at that ecosystem together and figure out where and how we can intervene in the right way.
And I'm really glad you mentioned the broader ecosystem because we've mostly been talking about employers and employees, but there are other important members of the ecosystem, whether it's philanthropy, whether it's policy makers, think tanks. All of those folks need to be better versed in these conversations. Ben, I want to ask you a little bit about generational change. We've talked a little bit about attitude changes and the fact that we have seen unions more popular than they've been in a generation. I think some of that is driven by a younger generation. You're our representative young person on the panel.
Slowly working my way out, but yeah.
Do you think that the digital natives who are now coming into the workplace are going to demand that seat at the table?
Yes. And I think, I think the younger generations can sometimes get a bad rap around entitlement. And it's not that there aren't perhaps things to look at there, but I do think there's a sense of that because you are a human being, you are worthy of being part of the conversation. And I think that increasingly the younger generations expect that. Like, well, hey, I work here. Why would I not be included in the conversation? And I think the thing that I would love for us as the labor movement, like I don't think any of us are anti-technology. We're pro-worker. And I think that is a message that resonates with people. And I think that's why we're seeing both the younger generations and society writ large embracing the labor movement in a different way, because it's something that resonates with people. People understand, yeah, you go to work, you want to be treated with respect and be able to support your family. And we're seeing what happens when you spend a few decades without the appropriate protections and without workers having the same voice in that process. People are seeing the negative impacts that come from that. And the younger generations are going, well, wait a second. I can't, there's no world where I can buy a house or start a family with the wages that you're paying me. There's no world where I can be able to just exist in society and have the things that were promised to me as part of the American dream, right? That, if you go to work and you do a good job and you're a hard worker, and that you will then get all these benefits. And I think that's where we see, people all across America that have been promised a certain thing and they're not getting it. And I think the younger generations are saying, okay, no, no more. That's not going to work. And frankly, it's not going to work for businesses either. And I think the businesses are often slower to catch up to that, but I do think that that's a message that can have us all come to the table and say, hey, when your workers benefit, you as the business are going to benefit as well. This is not just an either or. And we in labor know that there are times when, there's enough is enough and we will put up a fight and go on strike and do all of that. But I think before we get to that point, there is certainly a conversation to be had by saying, hey, how does this impact the workers? Not just the consumers, not just the company, but how does this actually impact the workers? And I do. I think the younger generations are expecting and demanding to be heard in that conversation.
Just wanted to add one thing to that because when I first came on to the AFL-CIO in 2009, I was a quote young worker at 39, and it was a priority to engage and mobilize our young union members and connect them with community activists on the ground at universities and in their communities. And I think it's evident that we have not done a good enough job of getting our young people who are so pro-union. I mean, the studies show it's 77% of young people under 35 support unions, that they need to be our messengers. They need to be the ones in this room. And I'm looking at the room, of course, and we need more young people in this room. So that's what we'll be doing next year, is recruiting and engaging again our young activists who are in the streets, who are leading the strikes and the pickets and hungry for change, and are finally seeing the labor movement as a place to do that and bringing their innovative ideas to shake up what we do in our unions and the approaches that we take and how we use technology to organize. So I think there's a wealth of information and experience that we need to include in this room from our next generation.
And if I may, I will say my experience of the younger generations is that they often have the passion, they have the mindset, and they are often looking for, to me, what is often the simple piece, which is the how. What is the mechanism? And for people who've been in the labor movement, you have that wealth of knowledge, you have the understanding. And I think that to me is the key, is the young people go, yes, I'm passionate, I want to help, I want to support, I want us all to win. How do I do that? And often that is the linchpin, I think, that can be a catalyst, is to say, hey, here's how, right? Like the simple mechanism, and here's what we're up to, and now you can go run with it. So I think there's actually less effort perhaps needed, because people are already raring to go. They are having these conversations. They're talking to their friends about it. And I think the labor movement, which we're seeing happen, right? This is a thing that's in progress. But I think that's what I would say to anyone who's, well, I don't know how to connect with them on their Snap books and I don't know. Let them know what the labor movement is about. Let them know what you're up to. Let them know that, hey, the whole point of this is that we can have a conversation and be the ones driving the future of the workforce and be driving what your future is going to look like. And the younger generations go, oh, that's what it's about? Awesome, I'm in. How do I do that? And then making sure that we as the labor movement and as unions have an easy mechanism for people to get involved.
Yeah.
I think Snapbook might be Ben's next entrepreneurial venture.
Snapbook premiering at CES 2024.
Well, let's stay on young people and organizing and tech companies. I'm going to start with Ben, but I'd love to hear from Sarita and Liz as well. Are we going to see more efforts to organize employees at tech companies in 2023? What do you think, Ben?
I think so. I think it is certainly an uphill battle. And as I said earlier, the technology that, again, can be used for organizing can be used to suppress organizing. I will always bet my money on the people and on the communities. So I will always, over time, put my money on the actual human beings that are in the fight. But I do think there's certainly a lot of challenges, but I do think increasingly driven by the younger generations who go, okay, enough is enough. This is not okay anymore. So I do think we will start to see some of those dams break. And my hope is that we as the labor movement, and why we're here at CES, is to say, hey, to those of you in technology and the promises that it's made, I have friends who work for some of these giant tech companies and in blockchain and crypto and all of that. And the promises that are made are not always kept. And I think there's an entry point for the labor movement there to say, hey, yeah, we get it. We've been fighting that fight since before I was alive. And to bring the knowledge and experience that we have to those sectors in a new way.
Go ahead, Liz.
I was just going to agree with what Ben said. And, obviously in tech, there are a lot of young people. We're seeing more organizing happening because of that, because they're connecting the dots again, that they don't have to just sit back and take it. The unrelenting schedules, the lack of control, the skyrocketing inequality that we're seeing, the even things like using your expertise and not being subjected to a non-compete agreement, which we know the FTC is starting to pay attention to. But still with a union, you can actually speak up and put guardrails around how you use your expertise and how it can be transferred. The ethical considerations, we saw walkouts at Google because people were saying, wait a second, what I'm building and creating is actually not in sync with my values. But the problem is they walked out one day and then came back to work the next day and didn't have a way to institute systemic change. And the only way you can do that is to have the law behind you and organize a union so that you can sit across the table from your employer and bargain that change that you so desperately want to see. But what heartens me is that, you see video gamers, for example, I said before, but at ZeniMax, right? Microsoft has a neutrality agreement with the Communications Workers of America. And they saw their first victory at ZeniMax under that neutrality agreement. It just shows that when companies don't stand in the way of organizing and they allow workers to make a free choice without intimidation and harassment, they choose to come together collectively. And so I think it's a trend that we hope will take hold across the tech sector that we'll see more of. But what won't change is that workers are courageous. They're standing up. They're exercising their voice like never before. And they're seeing that the power that they want, especially in this economy, because we know that it's unequal, is they find it through forming unions.
Yeah, I guess the only other thing I would add to what Ben and Liz have shared is just to urge all of us to think as expansively as we can when we define who we mean by tech workers. Because sometimes we can suggest that tech workers are the high-skilled tech workers and meanwhile, we see Silicon Valley rising, groups like gig workers rising. These are platform-mediated workers. They're app delivery workers who are organizing to no end right now. So how do we, as a worker movement and as an ecosystem that cares about workers, in this moment of such immense change, have a really expansive view of who we mean by tech workers? And then how do we also look outside of the organizing that's happening in unions? So the unions are organizing, but there is organizing happening outside of the unions. And I named a few efforts that are underway, but those are important efforts. And this is the moment, this goes to your point about young people. This is the moment for the labor movement to say, you are part of the labor movement. You are not a separate movement of worker groups over here. You are a part of a unified labor movement with us, because ultimately they too have to negotiate with these companies, right? So I have a lot of curiosity about and excitement about what's possible when we think at that level.
We could go another 40 minutes, but I have well, for my closing question, I want everyone to think a little bit about this, which is, if you could write a workers' bill of rights as it relates to technology, what's something you would want to include in that? And while you're thinking about the answer to that, Liz, I wanted to ask you specifically about the CHIPS Act, which you have referenced in a couple of your remarks. I was struck in looking at the administration's talking points around the CHIPS Act that they talked about union jobs vis-a-vis construction and infrastructure, but not about the actual manufacturing of the chips. And I just thought that was a glaring oversight. And I just wonder if you have thoughts on how organized labor can make sure that the people who are actually making the technology are organized.
Oh, absolutely. And I think you're right. There hasn't been a rule book written for a lot of the other jobs throughout the supply chain, because construction is very sophisticated in terms of its industry approaches, how it trains, how unions actually function with employers. And we don't necessarily have that in areas that have been offshored, for example. And semiconductors is one great example where we have a huge opportunity to use it as a way to advance equity and inclusion and bring communities who have been sidelined into the center of our strategy. We have an opportunity to make sure that training can start in the high schools and be a pathway directly into those highly skilled jobs, potentially a new form of apprenticeship, that you won't necessarily need a college degree for these jobs, but they still should be highly paid, highly skilled, we would say union jobs in manufacturing. But it's a burgeoning industry, and that's why we were insistent that when the money is starting to go out the door, that at the regional level, we build partnerships. We build partnerships with the companies, with the education institutions, with the government structures, so that workers' voices are at the table as these monies are actually being implemented at the local level, and how they're going to show up and how the laws are going to be enforced. So the good news is we have an administration who is very much looking through the lens of workers and wants to make sure that they come through on that promise, that this isn't going to be just a check that we write to companies and subsidize them, that there has to be an opportunity to create good jobs, pathways to the middle class, as they say. And we believe that having those partnerships will be absolutely essential, particularly in manufacturing.
I'm getting the proverbial
Hi.
So we'll do a speed round for our last question. Sarita, Workers' Bill of Rights as it pertains to tech. What should it include?
So I think a workers' bill of rights for tech should ensure that all jobs are good jobs. And I know some of you have heard Deputy Secretary Julie Su talk about some of the good jobs quality index that the US government has certainly been working on, like how we ensure they're all good jobs that, must include data rights, guardrails around workplace surveillance, worker-developed rules for algorithmic management, and labor protections and sovereignty. And I think there's lots of really good organizing that's happening now, both within unions and outside of unions, that we can draw from to make that possible. So those are some of the things I would lift up.
Yeah, those are good ones. Ben?
Yeah, those sound good. I like those. Two things. One, I mean, Liz, something you said sparked, like, technology purports to increase freedom, and then we see technology used to, diminish people's ability to organize, right? So, okay, you value freedom, then give people freedom to organize, give people freedom to have that conversation at the table. And I do think that's an underpinning. As far as it relates to the technology side of things, I think, something we see in our industry really comes down to the idea of, truly informed consent. We see it with generative AI, right? And you may have seen the latest Star Wars movie, and Princess Leia, who, the actress had passed away. And it, was a beautiful, wonderful part of the movie. But what's important is that was negotiated with the estate. That was compensated, right? There was consent. So whether we're talking about generative AI, deep fakes, all the rest, and I think that concept of, this truly informed consent moves across sectors. It's not just something that comes up in entertainment, though it's certainly something that we're very much dealing with and will continue to do so.
Liz, last word.
Thank you. And I was thinking about our last convention, or I think it was in 2013, we passed a Workers' Bill of Rights generally, and I thought we should dust that off and actually, apply it to the tech sector. But I think it's the same. People want good pay and benefits. They want health care. They want stability in their lives. They want predictability, fairness, dignity, health care. But I guess the two things I would add to what Sarita and Ben said were, this right to privacy and to be able to kind of guard, what's precious in your life and not have to share it with your employer. And then having a voice at work. It always kind of comes back to the ability to stand up for yourself and not be afraid. And of course, we do that through collective action, forming unions, and bargaining. And our Tech Institute, I'll just leave you with this, is our Tech Institute, I believe, is the place where we're actually going to come up with such a thing as a Workers' Bill of Rights for the tech sector. Because this year, I believe, will be the pivotal year, 2023. We're going to look back on this year that AI is going to be the next frontier for workers. I mean, it is the moment where we are going to unleash this power that is going to make our heads spin. And so we don't want to look back and think of this as a wasted opportunity.
Liz Shuler, Sarita Gupta, and Ben Wade here. Thank you so much for your comments this afternoon.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you all.